between the surface on which an image is created and the surfaces around and beyond it. It enables us to find the borders of what we can then frame, so to speak, for analysis. It defines a relationship between image and viewer, essentially shaping our reception. The presence of a frame within which exists a composition, along with features such as line, form, iconography, color, depth of field, superimposition, perspective, illusion, space, scale, and so on, are central to our ability to understand the things that we see as artworks, or indeed the visual expression of ideas. We use these terms to help make sense of meaningful relationships that are established both within the composition itself as well as with the world beyond it. We identify skill, harmony, verisimilitude, and the presence of emotion. And with this vocabulary of words, we help ourselves know what it is, we help ourselves know and understand the paintings and the reception of these images. Even if these terms don't make it into the record of, even if these terms don't make it into the things we write, they are there in our discussions at the Rock Face and in the ways we make a record of compositions through tracing, drawing, photography, and afterwards post-production, adjusting light, color, contrast, and so on. Most powerful of the tools we use is the Albertian panoptic frame, essentially an early Renaissance rectangle in which we as viewer occupy a central position. The rectangle of our camera with a single vanishing point or sheet of tracing paper or cell phone screen determines the frame of the artwork, creates the borders of the composition, and provides us with the image to interpret. This rectangle is then reiterated in a dozen ways in the world we have made since architecture began. We stare out of windows, doors, onto computer screens, at books, the walls of our rooms. Everywhere the world is framed, and the idea of composition that results therefrom is so embedded and instantiated that we are hardly aware of its power. Hunter-gatherer rock artists did not live within the grip of the rectangle, and there is no evidence that the terms so central to us were valid for them. Our terms help us appreciate their art, but I doubt they help us know how they felt about it. In trying to access the latter, I believe we have an astonishing resource in the Blake and Lloyd archive, and in particular in the 27 different hunter-gatherer languages and dialects from more than 100 years ago in over 60,000 dictionary entries that it includes. Here we have an opportunity to let their words guide us in understanding their rock art, rather than relying on our own words to impose meanings upon it. Not only in the dictionaries, but in the vast array of materials that comprise the Blake and Lloyd archive. In some way, it acts as metonymy for ways in which San peoples may have thought about the art they made. In this talk, I want to tell you a bit about the digitizing project I'm involved in, the scope and depth of the archive, which I hope will soon become available online for all, and then offer some preliminary thoughts on how words can help in developing a new understanding of what might constitute a composition for those who lived without the rectangle. As many of you know, a major part of the archive is online. The notebooks of the Tram and Kung materials of Blake and Lloyd, as well as George Stowe's copies, and the notebooks of Dorothea Blake. This project was complete in 2008, and until the fire that burnt down the African Studies Library at UCT, I was almost happy to leave it at that. But watching the flames engulf the library building, not knowing whether the archive would survive, felt personally harrowing. If it was lost, could I have done more to save something of what it represented for all its vastness, the slim record of what was once a whole pre-colonial universe? It called to mind a slip in the Zam dictionary, which contains the phrase, dream backwards. A dream of a traumatic episode in the past brought to life again in the present, forcing one to revisit, reimagine, refeel, and remind oneself that the past does not stay in the past, even when it's forgotten, because it is always in a silent encounter with the present. 4 boxes of material donated by Dorothea Blake, including several hundred photographs, various negatives, and documents, went up in smoke when the reading room burned to the ground. Some of this material had been scanned, but the majority had not. One lost item listed in the fonts as follows struck me in particular, and it was titled "A Story Told by an Old Man of about 70 or 8 years old, recorder not named," dated 1930. The story had survived for almost 100 years until the blaze. In thinking about this, I was struck less by the loss of the story than by the irrecoverability, because of its loss, of all the material related to it. Who was the old man? Where was he from? How did his story relate to the others? It is this chain of connections to the scanned material, the imperative not only to ensure the survival of archival records, but to try to recover their wider resonance, and so capture some of the past that was never formally recorded, a kind of dreaming backwards, that has been the focus of our work over the past few years. It seemed then critical to me that the rest of the archive should be digitized. So, since the fire, much of our work has been devoted to scanning the boxes of dictionary slips, including recently refound material, and creating metadata for the Zam, Bung, and other dictionaries, for which there are nearly 60,000 digital items. I've said 70 there because actually many more have been found since I did my last count. Our strategy here has been not only to create a searchable digital record of the dictionary, but also to integrate it with the notebook collection and develop a digital concordance that explicates its use. This integration is then bolstered by a program of curations that seek out the wider resonance of the collection and connect it not only to related collections, but to home places described in the archive and to those people who still live in those places. In this component, I've had as my steadfast and beloved companion, Jeanette Deacon, whose pioneering work first brought these places to light. In addition to the dictionary slips, there are also word lists and 4 dictionary volumes. Oh, wait, that's the picture that was meant to go with my comment about Jeanette, and there's Jeanette at Jacob Kruger's grave. Where am I now? In addition to the dictionary slips, there were also 4 dictionary volumes. The scanning of all these is now complete, and we're working on the metadata and hyperlinking. Several hands were at work, in addition to Lucy Lloyd's, Wilhelm Blake, and Dorothea's, on this dictionary, and we've identified a forensic handwriting expert who I hope will help us discriminate between them. This is important because it can help develop chronology. There's much to be gained by discriminating between early translations as opposed to later ones that may be separated by 30 or more years. An example of this insight is that in the early months in which Blake and Lloyd were learning Kham, there were no color terms. It was only later on when Cabo, for instance, understood what was being asked of him that color terms were developed in collaboration with Blake and Lloyd. The version of the dictionary published by Dorothea in the mid-20th century elides this insight altogether. One of the great labors of this dictionary is hyperlinking each card. So, for instance, we have the word cow for mountain, which we hyperlink in one of the columns in our spreadsheet, and that takes you then to the notebook entry. And then we start to understand about how this word has been used to describe mountains and ground, but also Braincorp, the rocky outcrop on the top of the hills in Klabo's Place. This is different from how it's used later on, or perhaps in addition to, on a page as a heated stone. There are literally thousands, tens of thousands of hyperlinks to create. Another focus at the moment is the wish to unite eyewitness accounts of historical events that have survived in the notebooks to histories that have been written about these. So, for instance, the Great Flood of 1871 in Victoria West, recorded in Lawrence Green's compelling account in his book, as well as on the Karoo, as well as many contemporary newspaper accounts, is described in wonderful detail by Nkatho. Another historical curation that looks at wider resonance of the archive and convenes seemingly unrelated collections is the sinking of the Waldensian ship. In this project, we bring together eyewitness accounts from the archive, Lucy Lloyd's description of the wrecking of the ship on which she was traveling to Cape Town to her sister's wedding, with published account from various newspapers. The Waldensian sank on the Bulldog Reef at Strays Point, and we were able from the accounts to determine the beach on which the passengers were brought to shore. The curation unites one of the rescued items still in the possession of the family, a pair of blue vases, with the various accounts of the event and images of the environment in which it happened. We've invited various scholars, not all listed here, there are many more, who've agreed to contribute a curation to the website. During the past several years, I've also been able to undertake several field trips with linguist Matthias Brenzinger, a botanist Nigel Gericke, philosopher Bernard Weiss, students including PhD candidate Maggie Toy and Fabian Saptow, and others traveling to places like Lake Chrissy, the Kavango River, where the Kung still live, Lesotho, Namibia, and of course with Jeanette Deacon to the Northern Cape. Our plan is to visit as many of the sites of language collection by Dorothea as possible, and we're planning our trip to Angola for later this year. The digital project then is not just about scanning and loading a website, but about trying to reveal a web of connections that made the collection possible. The various curations provide points of access to different aspects of the collection, and the website will try to show the archive as a vast assemblage of leftovers, the traces of research undertaken, discussions, travel, meeting, interviews, desires, requests, insights, and expectations. A collection of materials with connections into the world of the late 19th and early 20th century and into the world of its readers and scholars today. So to return to words and rock art, I want to use Tam, the major language of the archive, and the art of the area in which they live. Oh, okay. I didn't realize. Okay, one of the things we've also done is there are many recorded bits of sheet music or pieces of sheet music with songs on it. This, what you've just heard here, which I pressed inadvertently, is the Song of the Ostrich. We've recorded all those songs, and Josh Pierce, one of our people who are working on the project, is going to do a musical curation relating to some of the sounds in the archive. Okay, so to return to the place where they lived. Zam, as I think everybody knows, belongs to the Kui subgroup of 2 languages related to Ngu, of which there is only one remaining speaker. As you all know, over the colonial period, the Zam were relentlessly persecuted, and in the early 20th century, the language died, leaving no speakers alive. It is now an archive language, preserved in the handwriting of Wilhelm Blake and Lucy Lloyd and their assistants. The Zam lived in an environment without permanent or even semi-permanent architecture, but surrounded by rock engravings. Their intellectual and creative lives took place amongst these, and at gatherings around the campfire that involved storytelling, dance, trance performance, and music. The central framing device of the Western world, the rectangle, was unfamiliar to them, and their view of the landscape itself was not bounded by the shapes of doors or windows. Nor have, as I've said, were the images they made constrained by borders that constitute a Western notion of composition. Indeed, it's even difficult to speak of landscape, for the term implies a degree of distance, a standing back and observing from a vantage point, an authoring of a single point of view. This authorization, rendered matter-of-fact by the powerful instruments of our time, like the camera, was, of course, anathema to the Traum. Also important to grasp, perhaps, is that the taxonomies inherited from Carl Linnaeus, on which Western scientists built its view of the world, were alien to Zam thought. Categories of being or states were unstable and shifted. Rieten, the shaman, went about at night as lions or jackals. Early time trespassed into the present, and ambiguity was widely tolerated and anticipated. Moreover, time itself was not represented as linear, and stories often belonged to places where multiple episodes coincided, complicating narratives and confounding causality. Engravings in Zam lands, and there's just an example of a categorization of a lion in scientific terms and in the notebooks. Engravings in farmlands and rock paintings elsewhere reveal these transformations, and the layering of images in many sites similarly speaks to shifting identities and the geography and temporality of meaningful events and images. Given all this, it's easy to see how terms and ideas that govern our vocabularies may act as an imposition. And in the following examples, I've just chosen a few from the dictionaries to try and imagine a different kind of vocabulary. There are many flaws in this, by the way, but anyway. How? The Zam were known to be making engravings in the mid-19th century, although the tradition may stretch back 10,000 years. Rock engravings were found in many places in territories, around waterholes and glaciated platforms, rocky outcrops. But a cluster of Zam ideas were convened on the Kau that populate the plains of the Northern Cape. A Kau is a hill or mountain, but it's not just that. It's also a place of power and potency. Sorcerers would haunt the mountains, at times living in the waterholes as fallen stars or agents of the rain, or in small holes in the ground. The rain bull was often captured, slaughtered by the rain beaten on a hill where water gathered because the rain's blood could flow down and drench the dry ground. Young girls at puberty were similarly often sequestered in huts on hills or mountains, and they had the power to turn a man into stone. One such transformation, identified by Jeanette Deacon, is recorded at a site in the heartland of Tram territory, and the stony figure looms out over the surrounding plains. Characteristic of Zam lands are the Kau that are topped with a mass of water-worn dolerite boulders. These are volcanic and blackened by the summer sun and cracked and weathered by the cold winds of the winter nights. At Tafelkop, near the home of Thabo, Blake and Lloyd's oldest instructor, such boulders are engraved with a variety of animals and others by the rubbing of animals relieving an itch, some places intentionally, some not. In addition to engravings, there's at least one gong rock. And I think there's sound here, but I'm not sure if it will play. Here it is. A large boulder that rests upon another, the presence of depressed striking platforms indicating that the rock was played, struck and played. These were referred to as ta guara, or sorcery's bell, making a sound which cuts like a knife. The word also translates as metal or blade, and its sound resonates in far-off places. 2 days' walk from Tafelkop is another richly engraved rocky outcrop. At the eastern end, there's a gentle incline to the top of this khao, but at the west, it drops away to a great plain stretching into the distance. Stretching into the distance. There are many different kinds of engravings, animals, geometric, bag-like shapes, as well as engravings that appear to depict human figures in perilous encounters with large bovids. Some engravings define the head and neck of an animal, a hippo for instance. Then the rock itself becomes the rump and belly. Around the engravings are scatters of ostrich, shell, and stone tool flakes. Occasionally, there is a bullet cartridge or a metal button, and the hilltop speaks not only of the longer past and the ideas that animated it, but to a more recent conflict and the fading away of those ideas. The hilltop is khao. The dictionaries show conceptual continuities with words for stone, path, dust, and moon. And the moon is mysterious, but that it was made from a shoe which contained the dust of the earth. And in one translation, earth is translated as the dust thrown up on the surface of the moon by the sorcerers. In the context of the space of the engravings, the artist's studio begins to feel very much like a khao. So these works, I would suggest, are less like a church building or a gallery of art, and more like an unordered place of convening experience of different kinds, all the while retaining in one's field of vision the multiple threads that make up the creative and intellectual lives of the makers and the communities that participated in what constituted their art. The khao suggests that the art was an integrated part of an unbounded space. Then there's toe and hara. The Zaan dictionary has no word for color, and it's doubtful that color terms existed. Matthias Brenzinger first discussed this with me and says it's quite common for hunter-gatherer communities. Early records of the naming of colors are confused and crossed out and rewritten. And while the published dictionary clears up the confusion, as it is cleared up by page 6601, it reflects learning. The Tsaam instructors eventually came to understand what Blake and Lloyd meant by color. This did not mean that they did not notice color nor that it was not important. The absence of color terms, and indeed numbers, for they did not count, represents a resistance to reduce, to abstract, and to diminish the fullness of something and what it might be. Color and the substance it embodies are inextricably entangled with each other and really cannot or should not be separated. This means that the use of color is really the use of a substance, and substance has value. That the materials used to make the paint in rock paintings had importance has been discussed by many others, but I'm suggesting that these materials may be as much a subject as the animals or figures they are used to depict. In Tsaam lands, two of the substances used in both rock paintings and in anointing and decorating the body are tow and hematite, hara, sparkling black specurite. The tow mines are found on the sides of the khao and protected by the sorcerers. They live in small holes and are feared, and stones have been thrown at them during the mining process. Tow is then smeared or anointed on the body as protection against the Gieten, and sequestered young women will adorn springs with tow and paint zebra stripes on the back of young men to protect them from lightning. At times, farmers find corked ostrich eggs full to the brim of tow, ground and mixed with a liquid into a creamy paste. This paste, essentially a paint, had multiple uses, but its origin in these Gieten-occupied mines must have lingered in its protective potency. Colors in Zam thinking seem more likely to be substances. An interesting concept in Zam for this discussion is we, which has been discussed by several others, Jeanette, Jose de Prada, Michael Vessels, and so on. And it's been described as a kind of presentiment, a tapping feeling on the body that warns of danger and might be felt in scars on one's body. This feeling is also able to communicate at a distance the presence of animals whose bodily characteristics can be experienced in the bodies of those experiencing we. Pippa, for instance, as I think all of you know, could feel the marks of springbuck in his own body as we. His head itched in the place of springbuck horns. He felt its black stripe along his nose and forehead. He sensed the blood of the springbuck running down his calves. In the Tom dictionary, we is also translated as a danger signal, as letters or a book, a proxy for something that can carry thoughts across space. Those thoughts then were received and registered as When Picasso was asked to comment on a copy of a rock painting collected by Schunke, he described the painting as Kui, translated as picture. And then he responded to it by talking about rain and related prohibitions. This translation then ties in with the ideas of long-distance communication and the feeling of thumb in the body of images and marks or even scars on the rocks. Given that the engravings are scattered around the landscape in which the thumb lived and often associated with water, the place of family history, because water holes were inherited, and to which game both came to drink, and Dutch farmers, others, people who were different, came to water their cattle, the kum were powerful sensations that could save or imperil life. Images engraved on the rocks by tapping or cutting, at times embodied by the rocks, could thus potentially be felt from afar. Feeling the presence of these scattered engravings approaches what we might think of as a composition, a circumscribing of space connected to those who lived within it. There is one further translation of we, which is drunk or intoxicated. It's the effect of certain poisons and implies the feeling of altered consciousness. If we take all of these Gui translations together, it is clear that to begin to approach the art of the Tram, we have to think of it as something we feel and experience, and not just as something to be seen, but to register also as sensations and marks in our own bodies. We have to think of the engravings themselves as just one part of a web of connections on and beyond the Tao, an extended, spatially unending composition. Part of the digitizing process has been to visit the places where dictionaries were recorded or speakers originated. As I said earlier, a year ago or so, we visited the Kavanga River with Matthias Brenzinger, a linguist, a philosopher, PhD student, a scholar of refugee studies, and a medical botanist. And we encountered Kung communities with a Kwe translator. They live side by side in places along the Kavango. Matthias had worked for some years with the latter and made a 5-minute film that I want to end with to demonstrate how one word, with a simple translation, yi, translated as tree, in fact embraces a wide set of ideas and practices. This web-like nature of words and ideas is widespread and I think well worth paying attention to. And now what I want to do is just share the other thing with you. Share. Share, where can I share it? Window, yeah.
Yi de kasai a tau te poema, te poem, I go dima, te kwete.
Ye, as trees, are important for finding the way in the bush and for providing us with food. Ye, as wood, is essential for making most of our tools and instruments. And ye is also the name of our traditional medicine.
Now, thou have kunkaite. Now is ange atiti. Nata is nga oitinge ha. Ara te kunwa muako. Tahonu de hojika te kona nsa sikwena. Tem ta kona mama ko. Anak muako at out ti chakunwa tencha gao kara ko kun.
Ye te
Yara ma tengui ma wo op. Prinyama te kobu no chamo. Tsenya ya tsenya he te tu no impo kobu na no chamo ha. Tao kwana he te umope. Tomo. Kani he teu sange ko impo no. Mazambara ma tata mazambara ma te wo okum mazata kuna tu yakara kwanu za kwa kanima se ma te khasim ma ngum tamakiai kai be henge tu atak kara no kom tam akre ngam kasai se tan penya kom atahui no twai Ndwayo anya ko tribino chwana tuji kwa ha unwe ndwai ko imho kuwi ko asara mak huino aro makheyo to takon adidino kheino dai no aro jigui ko tui yosim anya kuno dawi no so pasikai okom tan oni kukai no
ye kawana tem jao kapon. Yim ka te bottom atengum. Yim ka ami atengum. Yim ka gu atengum. Yim ka gu atengum. Nam kwanam ki yima te kai nam. Yi te cho. No yi jao ka to kaya. Tuy to ha yi kwe re yi kao. Da tuy to.
So at home at Gehem at the acquaint with Qualacoti Aquete Hamdi my mangam. Hama yoke out Chuka for Ham.
The most serious threats to our livelihood and to the survival of the wild animals is the massive invasion of farming people who come with their cattle and destroy our trees and water pans by making their field.
Pichiri Gwe Aina te kaita kwena nukohoji kwarako kurikara hoko na sino hanade boto tayeteta te kwete pichiri sharp jao katve gwedi siehwahi no ya hona tara shan kota kutena te khom no ubi na hu Takono anga tahimka te oma te yima guya hoite at uwakwa.
Okay, and that's it.
Thanks very much, Pippa. What a powerful way to end a very interesting talk. I think we can open the floor to questions. Does anyone have a question for Pippa? If you do, I think you can probably just go ahead and turn your microphone on.
Pippa, it's not that much of a question, but it is remarkable to see the use of language and of the visual images really as this continuity of consciousness into the landscape itself and the perception of it. It reminds me very much of the work that I'm doing with the astronomers, where one is looking into both the unknownness, but as we get to know certain galaxies and constellations, that we are able to find our ways, those paths that you were talking about. But that I think the format that you described right in the beginning is so powerful in terms of trying to re-understand this art as part of a continuity of life itself, as in the film Around the Trees, where one sees this tragic dissolution of the living web of the relationship between landscape and people. And thank you for that presentation. It's been really deeply moving.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I think one of the things that I think is very challenging is to escape somehow the tyranny of our own terminologies and our own vocabularies. And working with these dictionaries, one encounters such little gems like, dreaming backwards, or a translation of Earth being the dust kicked up on the surface of the moon by the sorcerers, or, any number of other strange and wonderful ideas that sort of stop you in your tracks, and you think, actually it's really an imposition almost to speak about this, because we don't share a common language and everything is an act of translation. Mm-hmm. That's the one big thing, which of course is not an unfamiliar thing to many of you. But the other thing also is the way in which if you look from page 1 of the Blake and Lloyd archive to page 12,000, you see a real process of learning. So when Dorothea produced her dictionary in 1956, we're looking at the end of that process. We're not looking at the first encounters, where actually neither of them understood each other really well at all. I mean, there were so many alien ideas and thoughts that they were trying to find common ground for. So, it's sort of also almost impossible to say anything meaningful without looking at that passage of time and how things change. And then I suppose, just being in the landscape, and again here I must sort of acknowledge Jeanette's work, because it's enabled one to sort of stand at least in the same place, in the same ground, and observe. And all of you who've been out in tents or sleeping under the stars know what it's like to not have a window to look out of. You're just part of this vast space, above and below and around you. And then, once you get back to your office, it all gets constrained into this box. And how does one even begin to write or think about something that is so unbounded and integrated? But the dictionaries
Pippa.
are just wonderful. I see Carmel putting up her hands.
I think, sorry to interrupt. I see we've got a few hands up. Should we go to Sam and then John? You also had your hand up.
I'm happy to go after John. You go ahead, John.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're coming through.
Pippa, thanks very much. Absolutely fantastic and inspiring. I want to ask you about the word dream and dreaming, because presumably it was a word that either Blake or Lloyd gave to another word. And it strikes me that it's a very important word, because for us, dreaming has all kind of connotations of probably being asleep and stuff like that. But I'm absolutely certain, and I'm sure you are too, that those weren't the connotations of the word. You know, it seems to me it's a word for a certain kind of sensation or something like that. I may be wrong. I'm not a scholar of those texts. What are your thoughts on that? What category of things do you think were encompassed by the word dream and dreaming?
Well, I mean, this is something Siaka's studying at the moment. I think he's focusing on dreams in Blake and Lloyd. But I agree. It does appear to encompass a great many things. I mean, this idea of dreaming backwards, I actually spoke to a neuroscientist whose area is the brain mechanisms of dreaming. And he said there is a kind of dreaming where you go back to a traumatic event, and indeed the story described is about that going back. But then there's also a dictionary slip for speaking backwards, talking backwards. Dreams in Kung, for instance, are described as coming into the country. They stand and they make gestures. So in some sense, they also seem to equate with ghosts. And in, later, by the time Dorothea Blake is interviewing people, she's hearing a lot about ghosts. In the Zam days, the Blake and Lucy Lloyd days, a ghost is really described as a skin. It doesn't have the same set of connotations. So I think it's something that I'm really glad Siaka's working on, because it does require, I think, a lot of unpacking in a way.
Thanks, Pippa. Siaka, thanks for joining us. Would you like to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Excuse me. Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Pippa, for the very insightful presentation and really amazing stuff that you shared with us today. And thanks, John, for the question. Just one comment that I just wanted to make in terms of the concepts that seem to be coming up, especially for the stuff that I've looked at on the dreams and dreaming. One of the things that strikes me is that there are instances where dreams were recorded as dreams. So the translation was quite clear that they're talking about dreams. But then when you read through some of these stories, you start to get a sense that there are certain elements that may be touching on things like daydreaming or some aspects of reflecting on dreams, but not explicitly pointed out as being dreams. So you might be reading a story and thinking, okay, this is something about an event that took place in the life of somebody, and then suddenly, within that particular story, something pops up that suggests that they're now talking about something at a different plane of reality or reference. But thoughts as well, as people just mentioned, thoughts in some instances seem to be regarded as associated with the concept of dreams, because it looks like this aspect of autonomy in these entities that, it's something that comes upon you. You don't control it. It comes into your mind and shares what it has to share with you, and then it disappears. The question of presentiment as well is a very interesting one. When you made that comment, John, just when you asked the question, it reminded me of the client's dream about the death of his father. When you read through the account of that dream, when he shares the dream with the wife, one of the things that he talks about is that he was convinced that there was truthfulness in that dream, that the father had died because he felt the tapping inside of his body. And it's the kind of tapping that Pippa made mention of, and Thabo, whose name is actually Dream, who was a very well-known dreamer, and being the Mantis man, the Mantis as well was a very, very a very powerful, dreamer. If you look at the Mantis and his friends, they talk about, his dreaming and how he called things into being through dreaming. So presentiments. So this idea that there's certain tappings in the body, springbok tappings, and I think in the particular case I'm referring to, it's ostrich type of tappings that accompany certain types of dreams, and then becoming a confirmation that indeed it's not a deception, because to some extent dreams can also be deceiving. So that is the comment that I have for now. But thank you very much indeed, Pippa, for the presentation, and thank you, John, for the question.
Thank you, Siaka. Sam, over to you.
Yes, thanks very much. I absolutely loved that. Thank you for the talk, and thank you for the wonderful comments so far. Sort of going in a particular direction. It's quite nice to pick up on these things and be, in agreement and say yes. And there's this word and that sort of, and they do. There's this integration there, which is, Pippa, you're putting off the Blake Lloyd online. Just there's this moment where the whole discipline just goes like this, and there was this sort of plethora of your, Mark McGranahan's and De Prada Sampers and all these, and people being able to actually get their teeth into it. It's been really nice. So two things really struck me just as you were talking there. The first being that when you said the art was an integrated part of an unbounded space. Absolutely, outside of the rectangle and that sort of thing. But when you said, the art being integrated as part of this unbounded whole, absolutely what couldn't agree more. And that seems to be everything that we find and research seems to say this. And then the second one was that the color not being separated from the subject, from the thing itself that has that color, which of course was, as you were saying, part of the problem with the initial interchange, where they were not understanding one another, because why are you obsessing about what color what this color is? It is, of course, the color of the thing you're pointing at, because those things have that color. And those things will announce themselves to you as, and John is increasingly going in this direction as well. And so with Andrew Skinner, Andrew Skinner's work with the new animisms, this is what the sort of direction we're going in with this sort of thing, saying, this is part of the negotiation, the taming, or brokering of relations with others, be they human or non-human, or whatever they might be, or a piece of art, or art, which is of course a thing, and it will show itself to you for what it is, and that really seems to be a theme. So, snakes are sort of yellowy green because they're snakes, and of course they're like that. That's, you don't really need to know. So a yellowy green thing is associated with snakeness, and a thing that has snakeness will show itself to you for what it is, and it'll say, look, I'm a snake, right? So I'm yellow and green, and that's what you need to know. There's my information. I'm negotiating with you. I've announced myself to you. Now you must behave appropriately. And it's all about that appropriate behavior. So of course that, you know, the thing having its color is part of itself, and it's
and of course the color is not
played with. Yeah.
Color is not separated from surface texture, which would be shiny as well. Shiny is also translated as green and yellow.
Exactly. Yeah. The shininess of it too, and that you know, yellow. on the other hand, with other sorts of things associated with predators, with lions and canids and things like that, yellowness and hairiness and those sorts of things. You know, they say things about somebody's human or non-human personality, and so color is inherent in what it is, and so they see us too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought I would throw that in there.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam. I think it's very exciting to, I mean, it's one thing to understand that there is a network of other associations, to know that it exists. I think it's another quite different thing to be able to enter it, or perhaps to dream ourselves backwards into those things, and really understand them. And it's very exciting to hear so many people moving in that kind of direction. Any other questions? If you can go ahead if you do have a question or a comment.
You're talking to me?
Yes, Carmel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You know, I just want to say hello to everyone. I haven't seen you guys for so long. John, hi. You know, when I listen to the complexity of all this, and the fact that you've these two elements, you've got art and you've got these notebooks, this archive, you wonder how people do anything with prehistoric art.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just wonder. You wonder what I'm thinking of something like interpreting the prehistoric art of Çatalhöyük. It did end. I mean, there might be some way to put it all together so that it's plausible, but what we call plausible has nothing to do with what it was. It's plausibility in our sense only.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, if I were a rock art European specialist, I'd give up right now.
Can I say something? I mean, I think that's right. It is. I mean, I think the most beautiful thing anybody ever wrote was John Berger's description of being in Chauvet, which was basically a description of the reception of the images rather than what they might have meant. And I do think it's reasonable that we're interested in reception as much as we're interested in, you know, original intention. We just need to discriminate between the two and know that, you know, reception is something that changes over time, and these things, you know, exist in many different times and places and will be meaningful in different ways during those times and places. But I think you're right. Without even a word, with nothing except, you know, the cave, or as you say, the archaeological site, without anything, it's almost impossible to.
Of course, you've got no scale.
What would apply to all of archaeology. I think we have to accept that we're not there. There are observations that we can make that, you know, is this a piece of sulfurite or is it a piece of quartz? You know, is the isotope value minus 26.8 or minus 26.5? There are those kind of things, but that's not those are all proxies for the thing that we're really after. And what we're really after is what you've been talking about. And Carmel is absolutely right. That's, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you think, shouldn't I be a or something? But it's wonderful to try, don't you think, Carmel?
I don't know. The older I get, the more impatient I am listening to people. My attention span is about 5 minutes now. I hear people come and give talks on archaeology. I think, thank God I'm not working there. No, I think there's a lot of archaeology that has a depth to it. But I think art and what you're really thinking of is the mind, the soul, the meaning of the society that this emanated from. I think that there is a need for a certain humility in our investigation of this kind of thing. There has to be, because you look at a system. I mean, I'm serious now. I look at a archive such as Pippa's been dealing with for ages, and the amount of effort that has to go into it, even with living people talking the language and everything else, how difficult it is to penetrate what was going on 200 years ago, 300 years ago. And the arrogance of archaeology, when they find a scratch on the wall, they're already into the whole business. I mean, Australia is the worst. I think truly Australia is unbelievable. A smear on the stone and you've got the soul of someone 20,000 years ago. I just have, it's an enjoyable thing to do, but that's different from an actually effective inquiry.
I'm going to come in at this point. I do apologize. I know I'm interrupting all the burning questions and thoughts. Carmel, thank you very much for bringing this meeting to a close with very sobering thoughts. I think it's words for us to process and to think on. Until next month, where we have another talk. Our next speaker will be Maggie Dutoy, who I think has joined us online. And I think please do join us, and we can continue to have such interesting conversations. That's exactly what this seminar series is for. So it just remains for me to thank Pippa very much, and to please, if you're not on our mailing list, do get in touch with me, send me an email. My email address is david.whittleson, WITELSON, @wits.ac.za. And I'll put you on the mailing list. We try and have at least one talk a month. And when we do have interesting discussions, there is some flexibility to keep going with that. So please do keep talking, sharing ideas. And if you would like to present in our series, again, get in touch with me. But thank you very much to Pippa, and thank you all for joining us online. We'll see you next time.
Thanks very much. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you, Pippa.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
Imfuet.
Mfowethu kunjani?
Siyaphila.
Hayi nokuhle ukubona.
Very good to see you, my friend.
That's
And
it.
I gather you're in Cape Town.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes,
Excellent.
at the Center for Curating the Archive. Yes.
Brilliant.
I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit, croaky.
Oh, yeah.
I've just been battling with a bit of a cold, so
Right.
I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
Not really. No. You wouldn't notice. We shall. We'll be in touch. I'm sure.
We will be definitely. I got your emails.
Yes.
I'll drop you an email, and then we can settle from there.
Super duper. Looking forward to it.
Have a nice one, mate.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.